Recently, I've been revisiting my toxic relationship with Halloween Ends, and during this period I did quite a lot of research into its creation, the critical response, and most importantly to me, what it is they were doing or attempting to do with Michael and Corey. Because the through line for this movie, for me at least, is that they dared to try something so new and ill-fitting of the Halloween slasher formula that its shortcomings are overstated only by its boldness. Quick recap, Halloween Ends is the finale to the trilogy of sequels to John Carpenter's 1978 original. In this movie, there's a 4-year time jump from the previous, and the story shifts its focus to depicting a new character, Corey Cunningham, becoming Michael's protege and eventually relieving him of the role of the boogeyman, but ultimately pulls away right at the final moment. This was met with much controversy from within the Halloween fandom, me included. Look, this video is a follow-up to my main discussion, go watch that. What I found during my studies was that there was an official tie-in novelization, as there are with many movies. The Halloween Ends novelization is written by Paul Brad Logan, one of the screenwriters for the movie. It interested me particularly because my limited experience with these books is that they generally adapt a mature movie to be more kid-friendly and family consumable. I know that's a very naive take, but this interested me because how would they turn something as graphic as the latest Halloween movies and turn it into a short novel? I'm not a booktuber, so I apologize if I'm lacking the usual conventions and literacy. I tried making some cozy set dressing so you'd feel right at home, but this video is going to be more or less the ramblings of a madman, so strap in and grab a drink. Now, as briefly discussed in my previous video, I'm using a Reddit post by Alex Sobecki as a springboard for my talking points, as they have laid out all of the changes and additional scenes from the novelization compared to the movie quite well. Quick disclaimer, I debated making this video because I wanted to make it clear that this should not, and by all means does not, act as a substitute for the novel. At the end of the day, I will be presenting the differences between the movie and the book and providing my own opinions and commentary. I don't have a monopoly over the Halloween Ends consensus or anything, so I'd still encourage you to go ahead and read the book and form your own opinion. I'm making this video as a broader way to learn about the book vicariously through my own takes, and I did go out and buy myself a copy, and while I still don't love this story and feel that it's a missed opportunity, this might have everything you wanted and more. Hell, it might make you enjoy the movie more, and I don't want to take that away from you, so please, if you're inclined, go read the book. Let's begin. The opening actually takes us back to the final moments of Halloween night in 2018, where we see Karen murdered by Michael and Allison taken away in an ambulance. In the first instance of the book changing the story around, we flash forward to the aftermath of the massacre in the early hours of the morning of November 1st. We follow a garbage truck driver called Ozzy. He's spooked by something in his backyard, mistaking it for Michael Myers, who had been the news of the town all night. Now immediately, I had a personal issue with this. Pause for your sigh. And it wasn't the content so much as it was the way it was written. There's no reason for you to fall, so stay upright, yeah? Cheers. A lot of this book is written as though it's talking down to you the way a parent would with a child. And what child is reading a novel about an 18+ horror movie that they're not allowed to see? This is a part of the reason my disclaimer wasn't entirely without grounds, because it behaves as though its audience isn't clever enough to pick up on the subtle nuances and subtext. So what it ends up being is this really awkward situation where it doesn't trust the reader to follow it. And I think where the language can and definitely would benefit from being a bit more trusting, it now feels shallow. Take this interaction between Ozzy and his wife, for example. You're trying to be funny, but this isn't funny to me. Listen, if we cross paths with that psycho, which I guarantee you we will not, but hypothetically speaking, if we do meet Michael Myers, we will win. We will win? It just feels so clunky to me. Maybe it's because of the people I surround myself with, but I've never heard someone talk like that before. In retrospect, reading this book honestly makes me feel the same way I felt watching the movie. Like I was being lectured on a topic the storyteller doesn't completely understand. I get this sense from the movie opting to host grand discussions on themes it would rather talk about, not faithfully depict. At least, not all the time. But perhaps that kind of synergy deserves some recognition. Rarely do two different mediums of the same story both successfully piss me off. But maybe that's just me. Anyway, Ozzy and his garbage truck partner Hugo happen upon a wounded Michael who kills them and takes their truck. He escapes into the morning. Then we find out that Laurie led like a mini Haddonfield militia throughout town for up to a year before she gave up. Every lead went cold, the sheriff resigned, and despite intervention from the National Guard, Michael was off the grid entirely. On page 18, the Michael Myers massacre became a national news story. Outlets covered the story relentlessly, and television networks scrambled to create dramatized versions of the story for their movies of the week and endless news specials. What exactly does a dramatized version of this story even look like? No, let's be serious. A seemingly invincible asylum inmate escaped from a supermax prison transfer and butchered like 36 people in a single night and got away with it. That's the real story in this world. How the fuck do you punch up from there? These movies have an obsession with deconstructing the enemy within, proposing wild theories about the human condition to confuse fanaticism with villainization and victimhood. You can't really have that discussion about the monster being mob mentality when the movie is also sensationalizing Michael, a very real monster who is harming people. Again, you literally can't punch up from there, only down. On page 19, after the death of her daughter, Laurie's own bloodlust became far more savage. Finally, we're seeing how Laurie feels about the death of her daughter, which, despite being a huge turning point at the end of Act 2 in the Halloween sequel trilogy, was seemingly forgotten throughout the entirety of Ends. They mention it once, maybe twice, and that's it. It's a little funny that Ray's death got more retrospective attention in Kills than Karen's did in Ends. It's literally Allison's entire driving force to hunt Michael in that movie, and throughout this book, we hear far more about Laurie's rage and depression post-massacre in a way that is far more nuanced than the movie. Taken right from the Reddit post, the very next thing that we see is that the Myers home was demolished and a community garden dedicated to all his victims was made. It soon fell into disrepair and is now basically a worshipping ground to Michael for wayward teenagers who are interested in the macabre. This is interesting as it shows Haddonfield post-massacre and its alluring fascination with death. It does a really great job at painting this town as one that is perpetually trapped in a traumatic episode. It is now that we finally get to where the movie begins, by introducing Corey Cunningham. The scene plays out more or less exactly the same, strengthening my belief that this is the best scene for the film. But now we actually find out a bit more about his mother, Joan, and I can't believe I'm saying this, it's phenomenal. Page 22 summarizes Corey's life until that point in a single line really well. With Corey's dad out of the picture, Corey became Joan's sole obsession, and obsess she did. What's that? Actual good characterization? Not in my Halloween Ends. Jokes aside, this is exactly the kind of language I'm looking for. They go on to say that Joan's behavior comes from being the oldest of 6 children and consequently neglected by her parents. She would routinely bully her siblings and ultimately torture her youngest baby brother before murdering him in a really messed up way just to make herself feel better. This sets up 2 things really well. Firstly, a hereditary sociopathic instinct that we will see develop in Corey, and secondly, it shows how Joan's obsession shelters and isolates Corey from the world he wants to be part of, and the world that he will ultimately grow to hate for casting him away. This is followed up on page 27, where Corey didn't share the same paranoia about Michael Myers as the rest of the town. On a subconscious level, Corey just didn't feel special enough to end up as part of Michael's story. This is great. Smashing it out of the stadium. This is the beginning of a pattern with Corey throughout the novel, and that is that simply, he is the best written thing in it. And I am so glad because I love this character. This kind of language suits a novelization perfectly because I don't think that you can really translate that feeling to screen. And while I adore this line in particular, it actually kind of highlights the problem of Halloween Ends a little more. The movie doesn't know how to articulate this. Social value and importance is such a complex part of Corey's character to make him seem invisible. The movie, however, throws subtext out the window and goes full gas on depicting him as a down-on-his-luck loser. Now, I don't have a solution to this, but the book knows that because it's a book, it can use these internal profiles to communicate who Corey is, and I love it. It's just the case of it suiting the page better than the screen. Alright, chapter 3 of this book is literally called Untitled, and I don't know if that's an oversight or if it's deliberate, but it's kind of funny. It might also be because Laurie is writing an untitled book. The novelization makes it clear that it was Frank Hawkins who suggested she start writing, and later on we'll see a bit more into his psychology post-massacre, and honestly, I think it's a really great, healthy way of moving forward. He was able to move past some of his darker impulses. This is where we also see that Lindsay Wallace had helped Laurie sober up and suggested she go to therapy. Around page 50 is when we see a lot more of Laurie's grief after 2018. After she burned her house down to try and defeat Michael, she apartment hopped for I believe about a year, and then she fell way back into her alcoholism. The town now knows her as the crazy old woman who provoked a brain-damaged serial killer. One great moment is a phone call she makes to Allison in the early hours of the morning, a repeat offense where she says, "He's out there, baby. He's still out there." There was a long, quiet pause. "I know, and so are we," Allison said and hung up. These details are very important because it casts back to the 2018 movie where Laurie was at her lowest point and shows that progress isn't linear. PTSD isn't just something that you get over, and I think it's also important because it's weirdly omitted from the movie entirely. Halloween Night 2018 ends with Laurie's worst case scenario. Michael breaks out, returns to Haddonfield, slaughters dozens, including her own daughter, something that she feared so much that she technically abused her with the state removing her from her custody, and then he escapes without a trace. How does Laurie feel about this? Well, in the movie we get a short narration where she's writing a book, and then she's completely adjusted to a new peaceful life of a stay-at-home grandma baking pumpkin pies. It confused me watching this movie because after all that, I expected Laurie to double down on her paranoia and be far worse. So I'm happy this gets a decent amount of attention in the book. It makes her more three-dimensional, and later when she grows paranoid of Corey, it doesn't seem like it's superstitious nonsense. We've seen her train out of those antisocial habits after 2018, failing, but still reaching a point where she can have some normalcy, so that when it comes up to catch her for the final time, it's both more tragic and, as an audience, feels more authentic. It's also at this point where Laurie finally takes Lindsay's advice and vows to go to therapy. She sells all of her firearms except for a single handgun she now keeps locked in a safe for emergencies. On page 50, Laurie is writing her book and makes an amendment to her paragraphing. Michael Myers was simply the personification of evil. It is up to us whether we lock the door and say goodbye or let him inside. Laurie paused as she measured those words. Then she made an adjustment. Let it inside. I find it interesting that Laurie refuses to assign pronouns to Michael. On one hand, character-wise, it would make sense that she wants to dehumanize Michael to take that power back. On the other hand, dehumanizing Michael was exactly what gave him power over them in Kills. So it again feels like that pretentious self-referential discussion about the real evil, and again, it muddies the messaging about letting anger consume you versus there being an actual fucking serial killer still walking about. This way, the message becomes clearer and kind of highlights how stupid it is. It's trying to be a profound commentary on the human condition, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. We then turn to Allison, whose characterization throughout the novel still remains as one-dimensional to me as it does in the movie. We hear about her depression, how trapped she feels in Haddonfield, her mistrust of Laurie's emotional progress, and that, quote, life had become something to endure rather than experience. While this is strong, it still unfortunately is her only character trait and makes for a monotonous, unappealing read. She still feels just as suffocated, and it remains the only reason why she's attracted to Corey. However, the book does offer one thing over the movie, and it's a reason to stay. She says that she is afraid of what Laurie would revert to if she left, and it kind of makes the movie retrospectively more puzzling, because this isn't even subtextually hinted at any point. So why does movie Allison stay in Haddonfield? We learn more about her relationship with the police officer Doug Mullaney, and that Laurie had set them up to keep her safer. Allison describes that while she was technically safe, she felt like a burden or an infantilized victim, and ultimately, yeah, though she felt safe, she just didn't love him. So she left him. I still also find it ever the more strange that Laurie would actually advocate for a romantic relationship with a cop when her whole belief in Kills is that the police don't get anything done and can't protect themselves when Michael is concerned. We then see a lot more to Haddonfield, with DJ Willie the Kid spreading rumours about the cult of Samhain. Fans of the series might remember, the Cult of Thorn were a group of druids that would imbue possessed evil power into someone, and then they would have to sacrificially murder their family to keep the evil god happy. It was a weird time for Halloween, and it canonized the idea of Laurie Myers, which you'll remember they shut down in the 2018 movie.
Wasn't it her brother who, like, cold-blooded mutilated all those teenagers?
No, that's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
The Halloween movies have had a strange fascination with making Laurie connected to Michael since then. Her daughter had a psychic connection in some of the movies, Rob Zombie even brought it back to canon, but since then they seem to have actively moved away from it, so here it's just a little tasteful callback to another time. In the novel, it seems that the elusive cult of Samhain believes that Michael isn't human, but rather a supernatural force that infects whoever the cult desires to carry out their bidding. This time around, Willie the Kid is broadcasting the possibility that child killer Corey is their latest vessel. At the doctor's clinic, Allison tends to Julian, the kid from 2018 who had Michael in his closet, as she pulls out a spider from his ear. It's really gross, but that actually comes back later. And Dr. Mathis is way more of a jerk. Much like Loomis in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, Mathis wrote a book on Michael, except it's more pathetic because he inserts himself as a survivor in the narrative because his former employee Marcus was killed during the massacre. As the Reddit post says, it's implied the only reason he hired Allison is to bolster his credentials in the Myers mythology. Allison treats Corey and they eye-fuck for a bit. She offers him a lift home because Laurie accidentally took his bike home. Ultimate playmaker. There's a really nice scene where they stop to get ice cream and their flirting feels more organic and better paced than the movie where she falls head over heels after a single interaction. And on page 94, my least favorite line returns.
Boys who keep secrets don't get custard for dessert.
Except, in a very strange twist of fate, it actually makes sense here because of Joan's characterization. It's less of just an awkward line and more of a deliberate manipulation over her son. I don't know, it made me laugh. Willie the Kid unearths audio logs from Dr. Loomis depicting his succumbing to madness and also refers to Michael without pronouns. I understand dissociating him with human pronouns to make him seem more like the embodiment of pure evil, but personally it just comes across as silly. To me, their deliberate backtrack to using it feels forced or pedantic and again pretentious. Interestingly, Loomis recounts a time Michael escaped from Smith's Grove on Halloween night 1984, where he was found out in a corridor with his face wrapped in white linen. It feeds back into the sequel's absurd obsession with Michael's mask giving him power, something that I discussed at length in my previous video. And it also establishes a motif used often throughout the book, and it's the deliberate masking of one's face. If a face personifies humanity, hiding it is paramount to characters who are possessed by evil. This book also refers to those with that same evil as a shape, which is another one of Michael's aliases like the boogeyman. They will say sentences like, "She saw his shape," or "A shape was obscured behind the window." Both the hidden face and shape narrative devices felt like very artificial profundity every time they appeared, but whatever. Loomis is also so unhinged by this point. He says Michael can't be rehabilitated and he needs to burn in the depths of hell. God, I love this man. What we then see is one of my favorite additions from the novel, and it's a chapter where Corey sneaks out in the night and heads to the Allens' home. Since Jeremy's death, it's been abandoned, which is something that they never really make clear in the movie. They just sort of inexplicably go there again, and now it's empty. The implication is there, but it's a little jarring because this is the second time it's ever brought up in the movie, I believe. He walks through the rooms and notes the stained blood pool at the bottom of the staircase that they could never remove. The wind howling through the house sounds like their screams, and it haunts Corey. He moves to the top of the staircase and climbs over the railing. He dangles there and attempts to drop to his death, but he just can't bring himself to let go. He climbs back over, disappointed, regretful, and feeling very guilty. I think that this scene should have been in the movie. It's the clearest notion that Corey comes to this house so often to contemplate suicide, and every attempt is abandoned. It speaks to his grief over Jeremy, his isolation by his mother, and his suffocating future in Haddonfield. All around, fantastic character building. Just 30 pages later, after the bar scene on page 128, Corey has some pretty intense graphic suicidal ideation that I think work quite well to put us in his head. It's tasteful in that it's honest and isn't there to villainize him for it. He feels so disordered and lost and unable to love himself. It actually made me want to give him a hug. And I think this is where Halloween Ends is at its strongest. By far, Corey is the best written character because he's the most human. I empathize with him the most, and when he's happy, even though briefly, it makes me happy too. Again, something like this should have been in the movie. In this instance, suicidal ideation is important to depict because it humanizes people and power scales them. It shows that they have very little control over the movement of their lives, and it's equally as difficult to keep going. It's far more appropriate than, say, Laurie low-key throwing shade at suicide victims, but I'll return to this later. Another change is an expansion upon... Oh, what's this? The homeless guy beneath the bridge? His name is Nelson Christopher, and he was violently traumatized from watching his mother kill herself when he was a child. His father, a religious fanatic, blamed Nelson for it and would routinely torture him in a shed. Years later, his sister would return and see Nelson in such a malnourished, traumatic, unrecognizable state that she took pity on him and brought him into her home for rescue. Eventually, he falls into a form of violent withdrawal and attacks his sister and her family. They survive, but he heads to a mall to attack people with a hatchet and mask. He's then locked up at Smith's Grove. Now reading directly from the Reddit post, Dr. Sartain used Nelson to try and get Michael to react. After all the torture and abuse Sartain put him through, Nelson started to see Michael as a god and pledged his devotion toward him. A class action lawsuit against Smith's Grove forces them to release several of their inmates, and Nelson escapes during the bus crash in 2018. Nelson had no body, so he became a drifter, and while collecting cans one day under an overpass, he senses that same feeling he felt back at Smith's Grove and realizes that he has found his god once more, again pledging to serve him and bring him food and victims. I don't know how I feel about this. Great character, engaging read, but I don't like that every single character in this story is in one way or another tied to someone else. I kind of liked the mysterious allure of this random old vagabond that seemingly feeds Michael because he's crazy. Giving them a history together cheapens that for me. Okay, so these movies are strange because they introduce some of the most interesting characters ever, but put them in the completely wrong story. Nelson Christopher is so fantastic and is deserving of his own story altogether. Same with how I feel about Corey in my last video. On page 136, while writing, Laurie reflects on her own history with Michael. Dr. Loomis had saved my life, but Michael Myers had taken control of it. I think that this is perfect. It says it all beautifully. It goes into detail about Laurie's first encounter with Michael in the Wallace's house and its profound impact on her. And then her decaying relationship with her parents after 1978 when they kicked her out of her home because of her nightmares. In 1979, her father died of a heart attack that she blames herself for. Quote, "He had a heart attack while showing a property, a heart no doubt weakened by the pain he saw in my eyes." She details her relationship with Loomis, where they would regularly meet and he seemed to become increasingly mad with every reunion. She states that she sees no use in leaving Haddonfield because Michael would follow her anywhere. I said this in my previous video, but I find that tragedy really honest. Laurie paints this target on her back that she is Michael's objective, when in reality, he wanders and kills indiscriminately. This reasoning bears fruit in the non-canon Halloween 2 timeline with the whole Sam Haines sacrifice plot, but the irony is that it was just a random attack that traumatized her to such a point where she believes he will return to finish the job. The sad reality, supported by 2018's plot, is that that is just not the case. And you'll note that Michael only got involved in Laurie's life in both 2018 and Kills when she directly provoked him and attracted his full attention. Bro could not care less. But strangely, Ends takes a different, contradictory path, by having Michael stalk Laurie once more throughout Act 2. Yeah, it's a little fun callback, but the action of him seeking her out to stalk her, rather than it being a chance encounter that captivates him, firstly contradicts the previous stories, and secondly confirms her unhealthy intrusive thoughts. For this story to function, Laurie needs to be wrong. It's also more honest to real human nature if this exists as explicit irrational fear. And yes, the book also features this, so for as many good additions it's provided so far, it also doubles down on some of the movie's bad behaviors. During this, there's also mention of another inmate, again directly from the Reddit post. Laurie details a time during the summer of 1982 where Loomis informed her that a patient of his, Carl Serrott, had killed himself and 2 guards. Loomis had been making good progress with Carl, who suffered from schizophrenia. That was until Carl was moved close to Michael's cell and started to comment that he felt greater urges to his darker thoughts. Loomis noted Carl's condition made his mind open to evil, and being near Michael made his evil seep into Carl's mind. Carl's eyes also became similar to Michael's shortly before he killed himself and the guards. Ah, yes. In addition to this story's fascination with hidden faces and shapes, eyes are another depiction of Michael's evil. Again, it's not offensive, just a bit jarring and pretentious at times. Going back a tiny bit, there's another scene at the junkyard where Corey is fixing up a motorcycle while 2 of his co-workers tease him. I wouldn't say it's necessary because we already get that sense from literally everyone else in the town. Allison turns up, and because of the chapter where they got ice cream together, this line that appears in both the movie and the book doesn't feel as though it's like a desperate male fantasy anymore.
I'm gonna go help Ronald fix the rattle. Your car's
I don't care about the rattle. I came to see you.
Corey also has reservations about going to the party, but Allison promises that he'll be okay. After everything that happens there, including Corey being dragged into the sewer cave, Lindsay calls Laurie to tell her what happened. Laurie is dismissive, but Lindsay stresses that Allison deserves to have someone in her life that won't remind her of her past. And with the town hearsay about Corey being the new Michael Myers because of Jeremy, he's exactly the kind of figure she needs to escape from. Sorry, I'm a little bit disorganized, but now we're all caught up. Another line that returns from the movie is this really great interaction between Allison and Laurie.
Hey, what's happening?
Just, I can't get this fucking thing to turn on.
Okay, take a breath. Okay.
Just let me be mad. Why can't I be mad?
You can. You can be mad. You can be very, very mad, and you can smash things. Just be careful. It's addictive.
Not much to say about this other than I love it. I think this is one of the moments that the movie shines through to say something genuinely profound, and it's great for the characters. They've been through so much, and we rarely see something from them that's so appropriately organic. The next major change lasts quite a while. I won't go into too much detail, but it goes over the events that we never saw just after the massacre in 2018. Michael crashes that garbage truck and hides out in the woods. A little girl living out in a secluded cabin with her alcoholic father sees Michael stalking around, and though at first she is scared by him, she grows accustomed to his presence, or lack thereof when he vanishes. It's more a discussion on the kind of tortured, pleading mind Michael's evil attracts and infects when the little girl, with the help of Michael, kills her father. It also sets up this idea that Michael is down to double team with another killer when he feels that his evil is in them or something. It's ambiguous, but it makes sense. I just can't put it into words here. And yes, though it directly contradicts Michael as a character, it does serve this story well because it prepares us to see this return between him and Corey later. Michael also kills and cannibalizes a pair of teens at a meatpacking plant, the same girl that Cameron kisses in 2018 actually. She attempts the final girl circuit but is ultimately slain. Nelson also begins feeding hitchhikers to Michael around this time. He knocks them out, drags them in, and Michael kills and eats them. I don't know how I feel about Cannibal Myers, but whatever. Again taken from the post, afterwards Michael is looking into his reflection in the water, where we are told what he sees and reflects on when he looks at himself. The memories of his first kill. It's also implied that he hears the word kill inside his head constantly, or at least it's the only command he feels is necessary to him. So he's totally stolen Jason's whole gimmick. Anyway, we return to the present where Corey traverses the labyrinth of the sewer cave until Michael attacks. Michael forced Corey's gaze into the dark eyes behind his mask, opening his mind to the essence of pure evil.
Why are you say this? This is silly. This is silly and danger.
I still don't like this, it's so cheap, but what I do like is how the book describes Corey's next movements. The images of Jeremy's death horrified him until they did not. Corey trembled as he felt an electric awakening as the fear worked to excite him, as the hate he's ingested turned outward. Michael's head tilted as he studied Corey's fearless expression. He squeezed Corey's throat tighter. It had no effect on Corey's demeanor, as Corey absorbed the darkness. This kind of expressive language is perfect for a book. We get an exact idea of how he's shifted because of how it's illustrated on the page. Unfortunately, this kind of language doesn't directly translate into the movie. We have no indication that Corey's fear abandoned him or that his hatred turned outward. I wouldn't even know how to depict that because it's inherently an internal movement. This is supported again when Corey returns to his home and runs hot water down the sink. The steam obscures his face, and the Corey he once recognized is not the one that he now sees reflected in the mirror. It's great. That's the kind of imagery you can employ in a novel, and it does it well. Anyway, I'd like to stop for a second to mention how good I think the pacing is for this book. We are now at the halfway mark, and Corey has only just begun to turn evil. This is great, because now instead of stretching this out over 2 acts of a movie, it's just 1/2 of a book, and believe me, it makes the falling action so much better. Moving on, next we see an extra scene from Frank Hawkins that goes into detail about his life post-massacre. He gave up being a field officer to instead sit behind a desk where he was more comfortable. For years, he'd feared taking on something so pedestrian. Couldn't imagine a life more boring than being parked behind a desk full of paperwork. But once he got acclimated to a more routine lifestyle, he grew to appreciate the slower tempo. It let him get to know the fellas on a different level. Frank had lost none of the hate for what Michael had inflicted upon his town, but it would no longer get in the way of his living. I love this. I genuinely think this one sentence might be the most profound thing that this book has to offer. A portion of this chapter is dedicated to all of the small ways Frank had adjusted to his new pedestrian life. He recovered from his injury and decided to live in the service of others. That's how he found his best self. This is exactly what the story should be about, and I'm glad it gets its attention here. The best part is that it's not quite over. Laurie and Frank have a chat, and she jokingly refers to the name of the book that she's writing as, "You need to learn how to use a comma, mama." That's actually quite clever given that the comma is a sentence break, not a sentence end. It's a subtextual way of saying, this is not where I end. It functions here in the same way that the semicolon has in becoming a powerful symbol of surviving suicide and suicidal ideation, which is a core motif of Laurie in the story. And just like in the movie, Laurie seemingly can't just have this happy moment because the second she leaves with a smile on her face, one of Michael's surviving victims taunts her. I like the precedent it sets that people believe she doesn't deserve to be happy after the tragedy. It's a way of externalizing Laurie's internal struggles quite well. Now, I know that I just spoke about how good the pacing is for this book, and it's true that enough happens to keep the coal in the furnace, but by the halfway mark of the book, it has the same problem as the movie. No one has any objectives at all. They all have desires, but no one does anything to see them through. They meander until the plot happens to them. Instead of the plot and subplots being the thematic push for characters to grow and express themselves, it becomes a weird performance art where people stand around and talk about their feelings repeatedly. They go on and on about how they've never been able to open up and unmask to someone, and it's literally all they do for the entirety of the runtime, so it feels shallow and pandering. For example, the next addition that they have to the story is Lindsay and Allison talking about how bad Haddonfield is. As if we didn't get that the first 20 times Allison said it. Corey is the only person to be actively doing stuff once he's evil, and that's why he's the only character who's actually interesting to read. We see more from Corey's household when he returns home. Joan throws a fit at her husband Ronald for keeping a secret from her. He knew that Corey was dating Allison, and Allison is Laurie's granddaughter. It's a big concern for her because of how sheltered Joan wants to keep Corey, and, of course, Allison's violent past. Of course, Joan only finds this out after looking through Corey's phone, and it's a general invasion of privacy. Halloween Ends has an interesting discussion on parenthood. Respecting your child's right to keep secrets means, in the long run, they will be a more honest person because they're not feeling the pressure to unload information against their will. Treating Corey as though he has to spill his every thought and feeling means he lacks privacy and internalizes it to the point where he feels like he can't even be honest with himself. His anger, though justified, feels like something he has to bury or be ashamed of rather than face it and develop healthy habits. His environment is consequently very oppressive and isolating, so of course he'd lash out. There's another motif that appears a couple times throughout the story, and which I believe now only appears in a deleted scene in the movie, but Joan has a little antique porcelain rabbit collection. Essentially, the way she positions these rabbits throughout the house and in her display case makes Corey feel like he's always being watched by her. It's a visual motif for that parental surveillance. It's also why he feels more comfortable around Ronald, because he is as equally disturbed by them and quite hands-off. He respects that Corey has his own life and needs and is constantly doing little things to help him. He's the one who gave Corey a motorcycle to fix up and own behind Joan's back, and he's also the one who subtly encourages Corey to get out of Haddonfield and find his own path. It's interesting because it's also in the movie, but when Corey decides to finally leave home, Ronald says, "I hope you find love." I really like that little interaction. I mean, the guy also took a bullet for Corey. Ronald is such a lovely character, and he only genuinely wants the best for him. The eyes and shape motif return when Corey visits Laurie's home to see Allison. She notes that his eyes have changed and keeps writing her book. It's now established in her writing that Laurie regrets initially treating Michael as just a guy in a Halloween mask getting his kicks instead of the threat he really was. She notes that if she took the risk more seriously, then her life could have been vastly different. This is the through line that will return to motivate Laurie to protect Allison from Corey now that she recognizes Michael's influence within him. Just gonna put it out there, this is really silly. Not the protecting part, but the part where she can sense the evil in Corey through his eyes. Moving along, Allison and Corey take a long walk to the community garden and Maya's shrine. They reflect on the carnage Michael wrought in 2018 and how sad Haddonfield is, and I'm really appreciative that they did this because until this point, no one has alluded to their grief post-massacre, nor Allison's outlook on Haddonfield. In fact, I think that they should chuck in another 9 scenes just to really cement how far things have turned to shit because of Michael. I'm so glad that this story doesn't retread the same ground multiple times because otherwise it would frame the movie's thematic core as quite shallow and aimless. And then it would cast this bizarre idea in my mind that perhaps they wanted to tell a different story, but then had to railroad it back to completing a trilogy it already existed in. Anyway, Corey debates telling Allison that he saw Michael in the sewer, but ultimately decides against it. They both share their trauma and bond, and she notes that her anger to take revenge against Michael for killing her father is what got her mother killed. We then get maybe the funniest interaction in the book, where Lindsay calls Laurie up to ask what she's doing, and Laurie replies nonchalantly, "I'm just staring at Michael Myers. What about you?" This interaction is played for sincerity, and though she's staring at photos of him while saying this, it's fucking hilarious because I'm really not sure if they realized how silly that sounds. That's not something one human says to another human. And there's no indication that Lindsay would even know that Laurie wasn't talking about the real, like just him and not a photo. On page 224, we move on to the diner scene. Doug talks to Allison and Corey snaps at him. Doug looked into Corey's eyes and watched them turn black. Now, Corey is furious at Doug. He's jealous that Doug has interrupted the conversation and taken Allison's attention away from him. He's also angry because he can clearly tell that Allison doesn't want to engage with Doug, and Doug is being pushy about it before turning on Corey. It's explained that Doug was the officer who arrested Corey after killing Jeremy. Funnily enough, it was Frank Hawkins who believed he was innocent and helped him through the trial. And quoting from the Reddit post again, back on Halloween night 2019, Doug was already convinced Corey was guilty and even threatened to kill him, saying he could easily get away with it as Corey was a monster who needed to be put down. So tensions are flying, and Corey is angry. Now, I'm not opposed to Corey being a different, more emotionally motivated killer than Michael, but fundamentally, his eyes turning black in this context contradicts itself. When you tell me that he's inherited Michael's vacant, expressionless eyes, and yet he's angrily staring someone down, it's an oxymoron. You can't be angry enough to kill someone in public and also have those vacant, emotionless eyes that everyone says Michael has. The point of those eyes are that people can't read his expression and can't understand why he harms people. The eyes are the window to the soul. They are the tell, and it frightens people that Michael's eyes don't tell anything at all. But Corey's motives here are pretty fucking clear. The eyes are hypocritical. It's not smart or nuanced, it's a break in the story's internal logic that I find both underwhelming and indicative of how lame the story is. It's trying to be the profound hydrogen bomb, but it's a meager coughing baby. I know this sounds petty, but it's small inconsistencies like this that actively skew the way the main character functions in the story. Fortunately, the very next chapter is quite interesting. I'm just gonna let the post describe it because it's dense and they've summarized it really well. A man named Elvis Ross is one of the police officers with Doug in the diner. A flashback to 1982 occurs where Elvis takes Laurie home with him to make Frank jealous. At first, Elvis thinks he's getting lucky tonight, but soon learns the true reason why Laurie came home with him. She wants him to go to Smith's Grove and kill Michael Myers. He refuses and takes her home, feeling pity for her and noting that the lights in her apartment were already on before she entered, as she never turns them off anymore. I really like this flashback because we're seeing the paranoia Laurie has succumbed to post-1978, and we can clearly see where all those habits from 2018 are slowly built up. It's also such a sad chapter because, firstly, Doug is head over heels for Laurie and sad that she's seemingly going for other guys. And secondly, the turn on that is that she's so closeted and irreparably traumatized at this point that she feels she needs to use her body to manipulate police into killing her aggressor. No one is happy. The next chapter is the same as in the movie, where Laurie goes to the bar and speaks to Roger and Lindsay. Nothing of note here except for a really good line from Roger that's in the movie.
How they made faces behind his back, which, if I'm honest, pissed me off. Because I felt like they took my pain, my despair, and they made it about them.
I love this. It's a great commentary on the selfishness of grief and how the community jumped on the bandwagon to harass Corey. It's interesting how that rage transformed into something different when it wasn't Roger's own. The rest of the scene is the town recognizing that Corey has changed. I said it in my previous video, it's needless pandering to the audience that makes the entire theme ever the more shallow. But though there is that great line in an otherwise mediocre scene, there was one thing that really caught my attention. Perhaps it shouldn't have, but it did. You're telling me that Lindsay, the woman who helped Laurie get sober, invited her to a bar to talk? Ever since getting sober, Laurie made it a rule not to visit bars. So it's made very clear that alcoholism is a huge problem for Laurie. We saw it all throughout 2018 as well. Lindsay and Roger are also drinking more and more alcohol as the conversation progresses. Like, guys, read the room? I think the problem here is setting it in a bar. That is the last place Laurie would want to go to after recovery, and it in fact is. The writers have the freedom of placing this conversation literally anywhere, and they chose the single place it shouldn't be. This reads like a huge oversight, and it directly contradicts the messaging of 2018, where alcoholism as a trauma response was integral to showing her at her lowest point. But she's moved beyond that now, and they expect me to believe that they thought this through? Rant over. Look, it probably means nothing, but it sent off huge red flags to me about what the writers think about their characters. And it's a little more puzzling that while the book actually addresses it with that line, the movie just forgets her drinking problem entirely. After this, we get the kill the cop scene, which is more or less the same. Nelson's face is carved into a smiling pumpkin, and it's way more explicit that Michael is revived from killing Doug, and it's inferred that Corey also grows in power. We get a scene following this where Corey and Allison do the dirty, and she gets pleasure from inflicting pain on him, and he gets pleasure from the pain in return. Not gonna kink shame, just an interesting thing to put in the book. It's actually here that Allison says to Corey that she's been having nightmares about stabbing Laurie to death, and she feels nothing about it. Again inferring that Michael's evil has infected Allison too. It's pretty corny because she asks him to essentially validate her, and he's like fully on board. It reads like a poor fanfic or soap opera. The next scene is Corey returning home. His mum scolds him for spending time with Allison, and he actually talks back to her for a change. And she is so shaken by it that she backtracks to feigning concern. Laurie turns up to speak to Joan, and Joan throws a fit at her, and as Laurie leaves, she sees Corey staring at her through the window. Joan comes into his room to chew him out, and Corey feels himself becoming more like Michael. Corey didn't hear her words. He just stood in place at the window, as if hypnotically drawn there, feeling an uncontrollable intention swelling inside him. An intention so dark and so violent that it would not let him move until he adequately disguised his humanity. Next, we see Corey and Michael double-team Deb and Dr. Mathis. I really like this scene in the movie. It's so fresh in the formula, and it's one of those perfect windows into a version of this story that works. This concept is so appealing to me, and I'm glad it exists here. Corey watched through the door, studying Michael's methods as he slowly unwrapped the bandage on his hand to let the blood run out. Michael lifted Deb off the ground, then he raised his knife and impaled her so deep through the chest that the blade stuck into the wall and held her in place. There she hung like a macabre installation, life fading quickly from her eyes. Michael observed his work curiously. Corey pressed against the door, watching closely, learning from his master. There is one silly line just before the murdering starts, right as Deb is seducing Dr. Mathis. She threw up white girl versions of gang signs. I get what you're saying, because we all know what that looks like, but the implication behind the wording here is so backwards. Corey then drives Allison around on his motorcycle. She encourages him to go faster and faster, losing herself to the adrenaline rush. It kind of reminded me of the ending of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, until, quote, she disappeared completely to become a new shape. Not a fan of how the book constantly throws this in your face. The motif has worn thin by now. It was worn thin almost 300 pages ago. Corey takes Allison to the radio tower and they talk about running away together. It's cheesy, but it's flirty and to a degree charming. They talk about their youth making them feel immortal. Corey says, "I'm so tired of hanging on. I'm just not that interested in immortality." It's interesting because despite all of his changes and lifestyle upheaval, Corey still can't live with himself. It's like he's buried his guilt so far down and believes becoming this monster will liberate him. But part of him knows that that's not the reality. He's tired of hanging on to those social norms, hanging on to his own life. Like a gothic-esque fascination with death, he still sees life as something to endure and suffer, and he wants it all to end. He expresses that immortality is destroying him because nothing matters anymore. He's kicked out of home, and at his lowest point, he develops a strong murderous intent for his mother. That's when Ronald says that line.
I hope you find love.
He goes to find Allison once more, but leaves when Laurie is waiting for him. She's now fully convinced that he's the new Michael Myers, but for Allison's benefit, wants to be wrong. Then we get maybe my favourite new addition from the book. It's a continuation of that discussion of immortality. On page 291, he returns to the Allens' home and destroys the attic. Corey attempts suicide again and he actually follows through with falling from the balcony. He finally has the courage to let go, except, of course, he doesn't die, and it breaks his heart. I find it really interesting that because of the evil that possesses Corey, he's become numb to his feelings and immortal like Michael. Even when he tries to end his life, he can't, and it's described as a combination of both elation and despair. It shows the curse of him now being attracted to harm, but can't end it. I think this is absolutely fantastic and shows how to be careful about what you wish for, in a sense. It's a really engaging thing to think about. This kind of idea can't really work anywhere else. Catch-22. Fundamentally, it doesn't belong in a story with Michael Myers because it undermines the reason why he works so well as a villain. It's just such an amazing idea that I wish this wasn't a Halloween movie. On page 293, Corey awakens to find Laurie watching him. They have their artificial commentary on the nature of evil. Quote, "This Halloween, she would not let anything happen to Allison." As opposed to the previous 3 Halloweens where Michael was MIA and the Strodes were completely safe. Corey watches a spider tangle a fly in its web and kill it while talking about protecting Allison. It sends kind of a mixed message, low-key manipulative, so I don't know what we're meant to feel about him at this point. They're both kind of assholes, and I don't want either of them to be happy. From the Reddit post, Corey has a few extra words for her than in the movie, and she realizes that he is right. She really is the one to blame as to why Corey is in Allison's life. He suggests to her that she should just kill herself and he'll take care of Allison. Again from the post, Allison goes through Laurie's office and finds a bunch of old birthday cards that were meant for Allison. Almost all that she goes through mentions Michael in them and how Allison needs to be prepared, even though in one case she was only in the 2nd grade. Allison feels that Laurie is starting to spiral again and she can't handle seeing it. Corey meets Michael back in his cave and demands answers for what he did to him. Corey takes his mask and leaves. There's an additional scene now very late into the book where we learn about Terry Tramer, the bully that I forgot to mention, but he's been a thorn in Corey's side from the start. I don't believe the movie says this, but it's interesting that the book relates Terry Tramer to his grandfather, Ben Tramer from Halloween 1. Of course, he couldn't be related to Ben Tramer from the now non-canon Halloween 2 because... Anyway, his father hates him, so he gets his friends and they go for a night out. Honestly, didn't need this, but whatever. Joan throws a fit at Ronald, so he leaves to have a movie night in his office at the junkyard. Corey kills the band of bullies, pun intended, and they change Margot's line from initially pleading for mercy in the movie to now doubling down on calling Corey a psycho. On page 319, Allison leaves for good after arguing with Laurie. Baby, please don't let the darkness take you. Real humans don't talk like that. That has become another theme of this book, unintentionally. We get another scene where Willie the Kid's receptionist, Susan, is down on her luck and hates her job. She contemplates quitting then and there, but ultimately fetches dinner for Willie as he demanded. Then Corey comes in and kills her, and it's quite sad because the book does humanize her quite well. I think it's done to show Corey indiscriminately killing more like Michael, so that's cool, I guess. He also strings Susan up into another macabre installation to mimic Michael's grim art projects. I found this line about Willie writing his Halloween radio script really funny. A week before Halloween, he knew he needed to start writing out a script, but then he got stoned and forgot about it. And now, here it was, Halloween. Oh well. A peek into the production of this movie, perhaps? That was mean, I'm sorry. Corey then goes home and kills Joan, which is actually another deleted scene from the movie. Lindsay and Frank Hawkins play music at a bar, hoping Laurie would join them, but she's at home being sad. Strangely, a group of children are dressed as Michael at the garden shrine and perform a silly little summoning ritual to take revenge on their bullies. In a funny twist of fate, Michael does actually turn up looking for his mask before disappearing without harming anyone when the police come over to investigate.
Did you really think I'd kill myself?
Now we get to the most controversial moment in the story for me. In my previous video, I went to great lengths discussing how I feel about Laurie kind of mocking suicide. And even if that's not the intention behind the line, it does come across that way, and it's in very poor taste. But the book surprised me. The dreaded "did you really think I would kill myself" line is gone, and in its stead is "God, I hate being right." Which literally recontextualizes Act 3 entirely. No longer is it a weird jab at suicidal people equating their suffering to weakness. Now it's a very in-character line that adds to the drama. It's the natural conclusion to their entire character journeys, what with Laurie suspecting Corey as Michael, yet Allison telling her she's crazy. This is strange, because novelizations are generally based on early shooting scripts, meaning that the line was perhaps deliberately changed for the movie. Maybe by David Gordon Green. The final battle ensues. It's so awkward. Why is there even a final boss battle in a Halloween movie? Like, a final girl circuit, sure, but a one-on-one brawl? Bro. Like, that being said, I really like this moment during their struggle. Fear gave way to resolve. As Michael became just a man in a mask, her posture hardened. Yeah! Take that power back, Laurie! It's a pretty standard fight. I mean, strange for them to be fighting at all, but it falls to shit on this line on page 353 when Michael has Laurie by the throat. Laurie resisted his pull, and then she surrendered to his power. Her eyes lost their expression as they began to blacken like his, as she absorbed his darkness. Side note, my ability to tolerate, maybe even worship garbage is uncanny. The battle finishes and we get some flashes to the other crime scenes where police see the aftermath of Corey's work and hear Michael's death over the radio. Lindsay is present during the procession, which eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed she is nowhere to be seen in the movie due to scheduling conflicts. In the epilogue, Allison never returns home. She goes to the junkyard to see a statue erected in Ronald's memory and takes Corey's motorcycle as a memento to their time before he turned. It's a little sweet. Her car is fixed and she leaves Haddonfield. The final scene of the book sees Frank Hawkins visit Laurie in her home. She is very dismissive and shuts down his attempts to talk or even comfort her before sending him away. In every room, even when you could not see her, Laurie could be heard breathing, watching from within the shadows, unseen but felt. Inside Laurie's office, his mask rested on her coffee table, waiting for its new shape. Fuck this book! This ending sucks ass! You know what? Why should Laurie get a happy ending? We're nihilists here. Happiness is not real. Blah, blah, blah. Well, now that it's done, verdict? Honest verdict? I still don't like it. Fundamentally, this novel changes a lot of existing context in the story to varying degrees of success. I like the stuff like the little girl who sees Michael in the woods. I like the random double murder at the meatpacking plant halfway through in a flashback. It changes enough about the movie to make it slightly more palatable for me. Does it enhance the story the movie was trying to tell? Yes, I believe so. Overall, the book is a better Halloween Ends experience than the movie. I think this is due wholly to the characterization and expansion upon Corey, which is something the movie desperately needed to make it work. Scenes like Corey at the Allen's house with the paper planes, I didn't mention the planes, but he folds them and throws them before seeing if that night he'll work up the courage to finally die. I love how that juxtaposes to him following through with being immortal. Everything with Joan and Ronald is fantastic, and everything with Laurie and Allison feels comparatively dry and boring. Unfortunately, the movie can't dedicate this time to Corey because we're here to see the conclusion of Laurie, Allison, and Michael's story. Introducing this new piece, albeit a great piece, this late into the game is just not a good call. It needs to be its own thing entirely. Because of how strong Corey's story is with Michael and his supporting cast, the Strode stuff felt like an afterthought. The book retroactively makes things better, such as the "God, I hate being right," and for those reasons, I think it's worth checking out for fans of the series. There's a lot of gore and violence, and great thematic questions posed, such as Loomis's insanity, but there's an equal amount of that expository garbage in the dialogue. As I mentioned at the start, it's written in a very low-key condescending way at times, however it does turn itself around and feel more appropriate. Either that, or I just adapted to it quicker than I thought I would. My thoughts on it being a Halloween story? It shouldn't be. At least, not in the conventional sense. In my last video, I discussed how this movie would function as an anthological tale set on Halloween night, like Season of the Witch. And I think this book only cements my opinion that that's the only call to make here. There's just too many new elements, good elements, that are shackled to an existing story that should have ended earlier. If there wasn't a story to wrap up and give a grand finale, this would be phenomenal, and I think would set the standard for Halloween stories being one-offs going forward. Or at the very least, commit to Corey being the new Michael and move on. Now, I'd like to make it clear that though Halloween pioneered many slasher movie conventions, I don't think the sequels necessarily have to subscribe to a bible of them. After all, its roots were about experimenting with the genre and reinventing the horror noir thriller wheel. So who's to say that it can't do it again and reinvent aspects of the genre? Perhaps there is room to take this concept and make it work. It's happening everywhere. Jordan Peele has exploded into popularity with explicit commentary in his films, and that's just expanded the genre. The Philippou brothers, who I had followed on Years for YouTube, released their first feature last year called Talk to Me, a horror movie about substance abuse depicted through demonic possession. There are people everywhere putting themselves into this genre and reinventing it every year. What I wanted from Halloween Ends is for David Gordon Green to experiment and do his own thing in a sustainable way. I've said that Ends is a catch-22 of a concept where it has the elements to do something really interesting and unexplored as a legacy sequel, but it's in a trilogy so focused on chasing the highs of nostalgia that the chance to branch out is pruned like a bonsai. My only wish is that he takes this into his next project and really makes it his own. After I read this, I wanted to read more horror novels to build my literacy because I didn't want to come at this uninformed. So I looked at the popular classics, two in particular that I think everyone knows, American Psycho and The Shining. But then I actually enjoyed the latter so much that I went on and read its sequel, Dr. Sleep. I hadn't read them before, but I immediately got the sense that these stories fit their medium perfectly. It would be near impossible to directly adapt those books accurately, and it's because they're written to be books, not movies. I love both movies, but to make them work in a screenplay, they had to reorder chapters, omit elements entirely, and at times invent its own language to make it palatable for a different medium and audience. There are some thoughts in Patrick Bateman's head that can't be translated to screen, and that's okay because the director was able to communicate that sensibility even if we didn't know the specifics. It just means that going back and reading it, there's even more nuance. I'd argue the pairing of that movie and that book creates a fantastic experience in it itself. In a similar vein, The Shining has vast supernatural elements that exist only within Danny and Jack's head that are mostly all but removed in Kubrick's adaptation. Neither one is inherently bad for its inclusion, or lack thereof, they just exist as two different beasts that perform perfectly for their own needs. At its core, Halloween Ends functions better as a book, because like those other two, and every other book that's ever been written, its form is fundamentally different. We read the book directly from the author's mind as an omnipresent force that exists beyond the story. That's a big word way of saying the book is not written like a screenplay. They can get away with telling us Corey's feelings when they can't show us. They can get away with saying stuff like, Corey became Joan's sole obsession and obsessed she did. So much of the story is about people's feelings, their fears and their desires, but very little action outside of Corey stabbing people to death. So yes, this book is a very different experience to watching the movie, and for that reason, I think it has the advantage. It's also a very quick read, and though it's paced quite unorthodox, it's moving so fast that the lack of quality is inoffensive enough. But it loses points because it's not accompanied by John and Cody Carpenter's banger score. So in closing, I didn't enjoy this a whole lot, but it's better than the movie. As always, please go and form your own opinion about it, and maybe we can start a conversation about the necessity of this story. Was it needed? Did it change anything? I have my own thoughts. I want to hear yours. Please consider pledging to my Patreon for just $1 a month. I know this sounds wanky, but it all helps. With my last payout, I was able to afford all the equipment to make this exactly the way I wanted to, and with more money, I can increase my production value and churn these out a bit faster. Have a great day, everyone.